views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. The passing last week of Father Richard Gorman brought a stunning and unexpected end to the 63-year life of one of the Bronx's most dedicated and popular figures. The chairman of Community Board 12, who served in that role for 26 years, not only stood front and center on behalf of his Northeast Bronx community, but got involved in numerous social issues and political issues. And I can tell you firsthand, he was a wonderful friend. He loved a good laugh, and he honored his faith as the moral roadmap of his life. Over the years, he was a frequent guest on this program, appearing on BronxTalk 13 different times on issues of community import. And so tonight we brought along a dear friend and a board colleague in tribute to the late Father Richard Gorman, who was important to so many of us here in the Bronx. We'll watch some footage of him as he advocated for his community on this program. We'll take a look at some exclusive photos, and we will also, discuss some of those allegations of abuse that did dog him until the day he died. To guide us along, it's his longtime friend, Stephen B. Kaufman. Nice to have you, Mr. Kaufman. And nice to see you again. I wish it was better circumstances, but always good to see you, my friend. And also a longtime colleague on Community Board 12, the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, Carl Lenzano. Nice to have you with us, sir.
Pleasure to be here.
Steve, let's just start. When did you meet Father Gorman? How long did you know him? How well did you know him? I mean, as I understand, you've had practically a lifelong relationship.
I met him about 50 years ago, 45, 50 years ago in Co-op City. He lived in Co-op City in Carver Loop. His mother, father, 5 boys. And I was running around Co-op City beginning my political evolution. We got involved, and from that time forward, we remained steadfast friends.
I won't ask how old each of you were at that particular time, but so you knew him, and this was before he was ordained. This was before his career as a community servant. Tell me a little bit about what kind of a young man he was. I don't know that I never engaged him in that dialogue. It would be interesting to know now.
He was a brilliant kid.
Brilliant is the way you described it.
And I don't hedge or pause on that phrase. He was extremely involved, curious, never lazy. You asked him to do something, he did it. He helped get petitions for me. He was active. When
you first ran for office?
When I first ran for office, he was active in my political involvement, and I like to think that I played the role and sent him on his priestly ways. That's why I cover all bases.
On his priestly ways, I thought you were going to say on his community activism ways.
Both ways.
What were issues? Were there issues that you talked? I mean, I know, and we're going to talk about some of the things that he ultimately worked on. Were there political issues or ideologies politically that he was interested in?
He had an extremely incisive, sharp mind. Whenever he saw something, he knew the correct path to solving the problem, and he knew how to get there. He was a brilliant writer. If I had a problem, I wanted a letter written, a good letter, I gave it to him, and he did it. And there was a wonderful lady, Peggy Braverman, who left us also about 20 years ago. This was Peggy Braverman's boys, a bunch of us when I was a councilman. That time we didn't have any community money, so we operated out of my apartment. And she would come and we would carry on and do our constituent work. At that time, Co-op City was an extremely active community, and Father Gorman was always there guiding me.
Do you recall either discussions or some notice to you or his other friends when he got involved with the church and decided to become ordained? As I understand, was that 1982? So
He was
that's
ordained.
a few
I
years back.
went there. Well, there was a Jewish section. Cardinal O'Connor did the ordination. It was a magnificent
Now, when you say a
ceremony.
Jewish section,
There were
what do you
about
mean?
10 of us that came from Co-op
Oh,
City.
so he had a minion.
He had a minion, and we were very awed by the whole ceremony. It was magnificent. It was held in a church. I'm racking my mind to think of the church. It was in Washington Heights, and it was just a magnificent ceremony.
I'm going to bring Mr. Lanzano in the dialogue in just a minute. Do you remember any dialogue of a transition? Like he said, "Hey, you know what, Steve? I'm thinking of joining the church," kind of thing, or was it kind of just, I don't know, did it organically develop? I mean,
His mentality was key to serving and helping other people. You can see that from the beginning. A very effective way to help people. He was not interested in money. He wasn't interested in making a gigantic living. He was dedicated to helping other people. And the interesting thing, he didn't originally go to St. Joseph Seminary. He went to Eisenhower College upstate and got a degree there. And then he went on to become a priest. He was sort of preordained that he would do that.
what an interesting choice of words. We're going to ask Mr. Lanzano some of his memories, and then I'm going to tell you how well I knew Father Gorman, and maybe in slightly a different realm, being here on television. But what about for you? You knew him also a long time ago.
Well, I think it was in the early 80s when he was first assigned to St. Barnabas. He was in charge of the CYO, and my son played basketball. And
about how long ago was that?
1980, early 80s.
Okay.
And we got to know each other because every now and then I went to pick him up. Father was there. He made sure everything was going on correctly. Everybody was having fun and doing the right thing. Later, after he moved on to teach, he went to Stepanak and Spelman. My son went to Spelman, so there remained a connection there with us. Mm-hmm. My son had such a connection with him that and a warmth for him that he asked him to perform his wedding ceremony, and they married him. And he also baptized my two granddaughters there.
There you go.
So there was a very close, and at the party after the the baptism, that's when I got to talk more with Father Gorman, and every now and then I'd say something. This is what you think we can do about that, and as Steve was saying, he got right to the point. He says, if you want something changed, you got to get in here. You should join the community board. And later on, there came an opportunity when Christine Sheridan was president of Woodlawn Taxpayers. Mm-hmm. I was a board member then. Wanted to put somebody on the board because Oliver Coppell. So she asked if I would, and knowing Father Gorman, I said, yeah, sure, let me see if I could do something.
I mean, you obviously have just recounted many, many years. Are there anecdotes or things, now that, and for folks who just tuned in, we are talking about the late Father Richard Gorman, a very kind of large figure here in the Bronx, and he passed away suddenly just about a week ago. But are there anecdotes or things that characterize who he was for you, or things that you remember?
Well, Father was always at the community board. I couldn't believe, he was there sometimes from 8 or 9 in the morning till 10 at night. He was writing letters.
He was never not available. If I can begin my recounting,
never
he was
not
never
available.
not available.
If somebody needed something, he would sit down and he would talk with them. He would go right at solving the problem. But he was a type of person that wouldn't say, I'll take care of you. He says, no, you have to get in and
you have
pitch
to take
in
care
too.
Of you.
Yeah. Right. It's a God helps him who helps himself type thing. You know, you just can't expect somebody to do something for you. You got to get in there. That's why he was such an advocate for education. He wanted people to learn. Father Anthony Sorgi at his funeral and his eulogy said, Father spent a lot of time trying to keep people out of jail because he was a
Because he kept pushing.
well, he knew
pushing that envelope.
he knew that there were kids might run into
Oh, that
problems.
kind of jail. Oh,
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought you meant other activists.
No.
Oh.
He
So
he
he
was
wanted to
interested in helping the
helping the
kids,
kids.
and well, because he was the prison chaplain, you know, and he saw prisons. He didn't want the kids to go to prisons. He wanted to. He understood what was going on and understood that once you're in, it's difficult. It's a difficult life to lead afterwards.
Right. Well, now I'm going to weigh in. I'm going to give you, as if you asked me the question. I knew Father Gorman for many, many years. I will look at, you know, in some ways, Bronx Talk chronicles my own life and my adult life and relationships with many people. He appeared, Bronx Talk debuted in, let's see, October 1994. The first time he appeared on this show was January 1995. And you both will remember that there were a lot of talk about sex shops in Community Board 10. There was one, I think, across the highway from Co-op City. And so that was a topic of the day, and we were trying to do those kinds of things. So he came on the show at that point. And then came on, I'm just looking at the dates, soon after, 7 months later. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the first 6 times he was on the program, which date from 1995 to 2006, we talked about hot sheet motels, quality of life, sex shops, trying to keep those shops out of the community, and then just general conditions for the young people at Edenwald and at that time the Edenwald Recreation Center and all those kinds of things. And then later, because Community Board 12, and Steve Kaufman, you'll remember this, when there was a dialogue about siting the water filtration plant in Van Cortlandt Park, and it involved Community Board 7, Community Board 8, and Community Board 12. Many of us, the people in Community Board 7 and 8, and I must include myself, it's no secret, I was kind of personally active in that, we had been protesting and watching this develop. When it came to Community Board 12, because they started to look at the golf course where it eventually hit, he, just like both of you said, got completely involved. In other words, once I remembered saying, hey, listen, it's Community Board 12, then all of a sudden there was no stopping him. And not only, and that photograph which people are looking at was him with Assemblyman Dinowitz when they discovered that the DEP security around the reservoir was not what they purported it to be because they found a broken wire. But he became a leader of the discussion, as opposed to, he could have sat back and said, well, I'll support you. But he said, well, then I'll run the thing. And he sat at those community monitoring committee meetings as the chair, and all of a sudden he was maybe the loudest voice we had. Go ahead.
For 50 years, this man dedicated his life unselfishly to the benefit of the community. He was a no-nonsense guy. When he got involved, he got involved. You talk, the Northeast Bronx was being drenched with homeless shelters and hot sheet motels. I remember he got me involved. So we'd go picket one of them. I was afraid I would see my friends in there. We'd go pick up one of them.
And just to clarify for people who don't know, there was concern about oversaturation in the Northeast Bronx.
It was a big
that
issue.
was what that was about, right?
And how can we get to the guy that owns it? I said, listen, you got to picket him in his house. So we went up to picket the guy at the house.
Father Gorman led the way, I'm sure.
Right, and I thought that I would not come back alive, but that's how we were trying to deal with him. And he wasn't afraid to get involved, and he wouldn't hedge. He wouldn't lay back. He would go front. He believed in it, and he wouldn't like you're waiting for somebody else's opinion to come out to give his opinion. He wouldn't do that. He'd come out and say where it's at.
And he would speak for you, frankly. He did for
Absolutely.
me. So we're going to show clips now that are going to. It's almost like you introduced our segment for us. He, in the 13 appearances, appeared on the program 7 times to talk about community issues. He did 4 times. All of a sudden, he became the leader of the fight against siting the filtration plant in the Bronx. And then that photograph is from our 15th anniversary, and he participated in 2 anniversary programs that we did, and that was the 20th anniversary here on BronxTalk. So you want to see some clips? Let's. It almost will be refreshing for me to see who he was, and for folks who knew him, they're going to enjoy watching this. For folks who didn't, you'll get a chance to, frankly, in memoriam, love and respect somebody who stood fast with the people of the Bronx. So here is some of the best. We didn't go way back, but some of the best of Father Richard Gorman on BronxTalk. May he rest in peace.
At Marshall Golf Course, what involves the hauling of literally thousands and thousands of tons of dirt. And here's a company that's doing it, and now we have allegations of a connection to organized crime.
Do you have a sense as to why they were not saying to the Bronx, you know what, let's develop a plan and let's really do something about access to the reservoir?
Well, to be quite honest with you, Gary, it seems like we've gotten into a real catfight. And DEP is just trying to have its way because they want to feel that we got our way, and so therefore we've won this argument. The fact of the matter is, I think DEP has to remember a very simple thing. They work for us, we don't work for them. DEP seems to think that the water supply belongs to them. They have been entrusted with its care, but they care for it on our terms, at our behest. And I think, again, it doesn't mean that we can do as we want when we want. But I think it does mean to be treated respectfully and to have our point of view heard. When you take the ability of local officials and local community groups and community boards, when you take away their ability to be involved in the process, then we don't count for nothing and we get stuck with the mess.
What do you think should happen now?
At this stage of the game, I think the plan should be finished. I think there should be a thorough investigation by the federal government to see why there were cost overruns, the corruption that might have taken place, and if corruption has taken place, that those responsible are properly fined, and if anyone responsible for having been involved in corruption works with the City of New York, they shouldn't be in the future. I believe Mayor de Blasio has said that he's concerned about local neighborhoods. He wants to hear from local neighborhoods. He's concerned about the interests and the needs of local neighborhoods. I think everyone, if they want to do what Karen has suggested, fine. But I think you ought to get on nyc.gov, and I think we ought to burn up the keys with emails to Mayor de Blasio. He should have 20,000 emails on his inbox tomorrow morning. Treated or untreated water, Gary, there's no reason why the people of this community, the people of the entire Bronx, the people of southern Westchester and the entire city cannot in some way enjoy recreation at that reservoir.
Well, that is how I will remember Father Gorman sitting across the table from me, strongly advocating, pointing his finger, saying, this is corrupt, this is not right, it's the people who determine. I mean, and he was the leader. Go ahead, you were going to say.
Let me give you a little other anecdotes.
Sure.
He would remember my kids and always buy them Christmas presents.
There you go.
Saturday night before he died on Tuesday, we had 3 tickets to a klezmer concert. For those people who don't know, klezmer music is a Jewish genre coming out of Eastern Europe. So my wife said, why don't we invite Father Gorman? We called him up, we invited him. He said he would only go if we go to the Second Avenue Deli. He loved Jewish food. Jews felt a special affinity for him. We went there, he had a ball, clapping with everybody, enjoying himself in an environment where we were surrounded by Jewish people, listening to a Jewish genre, and eating Jewish food.
Well, do you want to add something to it? Because I have, I mean, I was actually quoted in the Bronx
I saw
Times
that. That's
about,
what.
He always would either call or send me a card to wish me Zis and Pesach and
Always.
on Passover.
Always.
And when sometimes when the Jewish New Year was coming up, and if I wasn't focused on it, he would be the one to remind me.
That's
because
right.
he thought that faith was worthwhile, And that's why that's didn't matter whose faith it
No.
was. It was very Bronx, of course, to accept anybody into the fold. Do you recall issues or things that you worked on with him? I mean, we talked about some issues there.
Well, the issues, as Steve was pointing out, was the flooding of homeless shelters into the.
Yes.
Now he had a conflict that, being a priest, he wants to help all people as much as they can, as much as he can. The other side of the story was sometimes when you put a homeless shelter in, like at on Bronx Boulevard over there, they had 60% of the people were ex-convicts, 40% was sex offenders. We were saying, well, is it safe? Is it safe even for the people that are there? But, and this was an incident with Anna Charlie,
Right.
when she was murdered. She was at my hearing. And I said, is it safe? Will you be, I don't remember if I said you will be safe, but
Right,
is it
right.
safe for the people? She said, yes, they had security inside. She, unfortunately, was killed outside. So, but that...
But this underscores, if I can just summarize what you're saying, this underscores the bottom line for Father Gorman. It was always about the community, and he was ready to balance it. He was not saying he would not give or help people
Right.
who are homeless or people in need. He was saying, let's have the community decide. That was the same thing with the filtration plant and access to the reservoir and all those
I
things.
love the word you used, balanced. He wasn't in another world. He understood the needs of everybody, and he understood the concerns of the middle-income people struggling to survive, and their legitimate fears that if you have a homeless shelter that has, as you just said, ex-prisoners or sexual offenders or whatever, that they could possibly cause mayhem in the neighborhood. But there was another issue there. I don't remember the exact location, but they tried to convert, I think it was Hexagon Laboratories, into a homeless shelter.
Yes, I recall that.
Gigantic place that was totally contaminated with industrial waste. I think it had 600 barrels of toxic substances. And we all got involved in trying to figure out how to stop the city from riding over the community
Right.
and putting a homeless shelter in that would be unsafe for the residents of the facility if they ever had a homeless
So,
shelter.
he wasn't even the sort to say, well, good, let's put them over there.
No,
'cause
he
that was
wouldn't.
not-
No.
I mentioned it earlier, and there were allegations made that he abused a 13-year-old male student more than 30 years ago. He never got to defend himself. He told me personally it never happened, and he was looking for his day in court. You're an attorney. Will there ever be a case, do you think? Or what happens at this point? Or it's just and a stain on his record or on his
Let me
legacy?
say to you that I would put my hand in the Bible and swear by the lives of my children that he was totally innocent. Let me also say to you that a bunch of lawyers, judges, believe that he was totally innocent. I personally believe that the court was a kangaroo court and he did not have a right to defend himself. Today, an accusation is a conviction.
Right.
In our life, we see an era of McCarthyism spreading all over the land, where a person is accused of something.
He
he's
was
guilty.
looking forward to his day in court.
Let me tell you, he was in my office 3 or 4 days a week. He was offered compromises and settlements. He wouldn't take it. He said, I am innocent, with tears welling up in his eyes, and I'm going to fight this. He would never surrender. This untimely death caused him to surrender. If he did not die, he would still be battling.
fighting.
Yes.
He was not well. He had many
Terrible
many
vascular problems.
terrible that which we didn't mention. He did apparently die of a heart attack, but I don't know that I've ever met somebody who was ill and infirmed who complained less. He, you know, we would have meetings about some very serious issues, very serious political issues, social issues, you know, and those kinds of things.
You know-
And it was like some kind of afterthought. Oh, by the way, you're sitting there with your leg up and you haven't complained a bit, and you know.
I went to visit him in Calvary Hospital. Evidently, they have a wound unit there. The nursing home by Einstein.
Yeah, of course.
They were draining his veins. He was in there for a long period of time. You know, unfortunately, it takes the death of an individual to really realize certain things. And his death, and I'm not just talking about myself, I want to compliment Borough President Freddie Ferrer and his wife were at the funeral. So these are the kinds of people, my entire staff, who believed in him. And it takes a death sometimes to realize how wonderful a person is and how much they were suffering. I didn't even realize he had a bad heart. He left my office Tuesday, he drove 3 blocks, and he had a massive heart attack. We tried to find him, and we couldn't find him.
You know, it was, as I said, unbelievable because we conducted so many businesses, not business, but community business conversations, and it never came up. And it was like, oh yeah. I will say, just to bring it back to a much happier note, boy, he loved to sit in a Chinese restaurant. I don't know where you guys went to have food.
He loved to eat.
You said, well, he loved to sit in a Chinese restaurant. Carl, for you, who sat with him on the community board, and he was the chair of the community board, maybe just a final thought about you know, what it was like, how well the community board was run, you know, those kinds of things. Talk about efficiency.
Efficiency couldn't have been more efficient. What was good about it was that he let everybody speak, and he put up with vitriol from people that weren't getting services they thought they deserved or needed. Or
we're almost out of time, and let me just interject. But he did it directly and
he answered them right back.
effectively. Yes,
Yes.
and
Oh, he
I almost
he went
wanted to
back
say.
off.
I almost
no,
wanted to say in a
he-
friendly way, and it was hard to be mad at him. You got about 30 seconds to have your last few words here.
I can only weep at the passing of a personal friend who was brilliant and did so much for so many, and there'll never be an asterisk next to his name as far as I'm concerned.
Steve Kaufman, Carl Anzano, thank you so much for helping me memorialize one of my really dear Bronx friends on this program. We've never done anything like this before, and I certainly hope we never have to do anything like it again. But I don't think there's any doubt that Father Richard Gorman was one of a kind and deserved what we did for him tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Folks, if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then send us an email at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. You can tweet us at BronxTalk or post them on our Facebook page. We'll read them on the air during a future edition of the program. You can check out our archives at bronxnet.org. You'll find Bronx Talk by following the Watch menu on the new BronxNet website. We thank our producer, Helen Greenberg. Our director is William Guzman. We'll see you next week, and we will say to our dear friend, Father Gorman, may you rest eternally in peace.